Pastors, if you get anything out of this episode today, number one, quit exploiting your disabled congregants because we hate it. Number two, make your whole sanctuary accessible from the front to the back, not just a certain section. Number three, make time for the disabled congregation that you are set to oversee. And don't be such a king. Be accessible to all of your church members.
This episode of Nick Speaks is brought to you by the Columbus Restorative Massage and Wellness Studio. At Columbus Restorative, every session is designed to restore balance to the body and mind. From easing stress and tension to supporting overall wellness, their team provides more than just a massage. It's a complete restorative experience. It's about truly restoring your body and mind so you can show up as your best self every single day. Whether you're stressed, sore, or simply need time to reset, their team knows exactly how to help you feel renewed. And listeners of the Nick Speaks podcast can enjoy 20% off their next visit by booking online and using the code SPEAKUP at checkout. That's SPEAKUP, SPEAKUP. Take time to recharge, renew, and restore with Columbus Restorative Massage and Wellness Studio. Now let's begin today's episode of Nick Speaks.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to this brand new episode of the Nick Speaks podcast, the podcast dedicated to the disabled community, where we speak up, speak out, and speak loud about the issues that matter to the disabled the most. I am your ever so handsome host, Nick Comstock. You guys, I am so glad that you're joining me on this Tuesday before Thanksgiving. I hope you all are having a wonderful week. And I hope you all are starting to get with your friends and your family, or even if you're just by yourself. I know it's hard because I'm probably going to be by myself this year. Just try to enjoy yourself and have a good time. Go to the Golden Corral. All the Golden Corrals across the country, I believe, are open this year. Have yourself a fat buffet. Or go get some Chinese food. Chinese food stays open during our holiday season, and I appreciate that because I love Chinese food. So I hope everybody is gearing up for a wonderful Thanksgiving, whether you're by yourself or with a bunch of people, and just have an awesome Thanksgiving. Okay, you guys, Christmas is not that far away. And I can't think of a better way to say Merry Christmas to somebody than to give them a massage from our friends over at Columbus Restorative Massage and Wellness Studio. If you sign up online with them, my friends at Columbus Restorative Massage and Wellness Studio have said, we will give the Nick Speaks listeners and viewers 20% off their visit when they sign up online and use the code Speak Up. So if you're in the Columbus area, whether you live here or whether you're coming here for the holidays, sign up and stop in at Columbus Restorative Massage and Wellness Studio for 20% off your visit. Give it as a Christmas gift to somebody, or give it as a Christmas gift to yourself. There's nothing wrong with that either. We all need to, at this point in this crazy world, spoil ourselves a little bit. So stop in at Columbus Restorative Massage and Wellness Studio. Get 20% off when you use the promo code Speak Up at checkout. Again, 20% off when you use the promo code Speak Up at checkout. Thank you to our friends at Columbus Restorative Massage and Wellness Studio for giving this amazing offer to my listeners and viewers. All right, you guys, last week I really opened up to you about how I was feeling, just in general, really. Some depression that I was dealing with, that I deal with really on a daily basis. And I briefly touched on in that episode that I was not in church right now, that I used to be in church pretty, consistently. My family went every time the doors were open. It really didn't matter if you were sick or not. You went to church unless you were thrown up. And even back when my older brothers were younger, they said sometimes they would throw up and my dad would be like, "Are you feeling better? Good, you're going to church." Um, so I think he laxed a little bit on that once he saw, that we were sick and thrown up. I think he laxed as he got older. You know, tough parents tend to mellow out when they get up in age. So I think my dad relaxed on that um, a little bit, not too much, but we were in church every time the doors were open. And as I said in last week's episode, I'm not in church right now. And I would like to share why. I'm gonna mention the name of the church, but I'm gonna mention the names of both the churches that I've been in, not out of spite, just because I want to be open and transparent and let it be clear. I still love the pastors at both these churches. Still love some of the people at both these churches. One of the churches I grew up in, First Baptist Church of Hammond, I still love everybody that goes there that I grew up with. Not a lot of people that I grew up with actually still go there. They're kind of spread out across the country, but there are some there, and the people that are still there that I'm familiar with, I love them dearly, including the pastor there, John Wilkerson. And the other church that I went to that I recently left in June of 2025, I left on June 1st. And I'm going to tell you why I left. And I'm not here to bash any churches. I'm not here to bash anybody. I'm just here to tell churches around the country what they really need to do to get their disabled community involved. And I really hope, um, if my churches listen that I was a part of, I really hope that they take away some things that I say and try to make some things better for the disabled members that go to their church, because I believe that everybody, whether you're disabled or not, needs to be a part. But from my experience, I believe that disabled people are ignored in the church world, and we are used for exploitation, which is what I've been used for, and I'm going to talk about it today. So I've grown up in church all my life, as I stated. And, when I was growing up, I loved going to church. I loved getting to see people. And I believe I had a genuine love for God, at the tender age of 4 and 5. I started going to church when I was a baby. I remember even as far back when I was 3 years old, I remember a sweet lady in the nursery. Her name was B. Mulligan, and she was just so sweet. And I grew up with her and her husband, and I don't know why I said or, so we'll figure that out. I grew up around her and her husband for several years, and they were just sweet people. And I've gone to church with a lot of sweet people over the years. But where I've really struggled is letting the leadership of the churches, getting involved with the leadership of the church, getting involved with the pastor of the church that I grew up in. Growing up as a little kid, there's not really much you can do in a leadership position. So Yeah, of course, I just went to church with my parents, and I grew up in a church that was fire and brimstone. So I spent a lot of time with hands over my ears. If you're watching, I spent a lot of time with hands over my ears because the pastors were yelling so loud, and I'm very spastic. So that scared the crap out of me. So when I was growing up, that's what I spent a lot of time in church doing. Plus, like most kids, or like some kids, I had the case of the giggles. When everything was quiet in church, I had the case of the giggles. I don't know why. I would just start looking around and laughing at people. And then I had a manual chair at the time, and I would try to roll myself down the aisle and get in trouble, at home, all this type of stuff. So when I was a little kid, church was normal for me. It was fun. I didn't really understand all the yelling and everything like that. But, I just figured, hey, this is church. So as I got older and I tried to get involved in the youth group, I noticed there wasn't a place for me. And I kept noticing that I kept getting ignored. But they didn't have a problem ignoring me publicly, but they wouldn't do anything privately to help me get involved in the ministry. They had no problem using me as a sermon illustration. I've said many times on this program that there was a section in the church that I grew up in called a Wheelchair Alley. I don't know who came up with that section name. I absolutely hate it. Um, Still hate it when I think about it. It was where all the men in wheelchairs sat, and it just happened to be 7 rows from the front. And when you're a little kid, I was mentioned in church as a little kid a lot. 5, 6, 7 years old. My pastors, I brought a lot of joy to them. And so they would mention me from the pulpit and say, Nick Comstock brings a lot of joy to me. And as a little kid, you think, oh, that's great. The pastor knows who I am. That's awesome. And I went to church with thousands of people at First Baptist Church Hammond. And so when the pastor calls you out and you're 8 years old and he's telling you how great you are, you're not thinking as a little kid, this is exploitation. You're thinking, oh, the pastor thinks I'm cool, you know? So it didn't really bother me until I was much older, like 13 or 14 years of age. And then my pastor at the time at First Baptist Church Hammond started using not only me, but everybody in the wheelchair section every week as a part of a sermon illustration. And it got really annoying. And I started feeling really guilty for the other congregation members that weren't in wheelchairs, because my pastor would say things like, if Nick can get to church, what's wrong with some of you? And then I would feel bad, like, don't blame me. I didn't get here by myself. My parents brought me. And, yeah, I want to be here, but you don't know what other people go through in order to get to church. And so I hated that, because I felt like other people that weren't in my position were feeling guilty, number one, and they were somewhat resenting me because I was being used as if I was better than them, and I'm not. And that really irritated me. This really irritated me even more as I got older, because I felt like I was good enough for a sermon illustration, but I wasn't good enough for the church leaders and pastors to spend time with me and really get to know me and let me get involved in their ministries. I didn't grow up going to a lot of things that my brothers went to simply because the youth leaders just didn't know what to do with me. They knew how to make a sermon illustration out of me, but they didn't know how to do anything further than that. And it really irritated me. I would, just try to have appointments with them, to try to get to know them, to try to be a part of the cool group. And some church leaders would say, why don't you try to spend time with God? You have all this time on your hands. And I mentioned this before. Church leaders, if you're going to say that to your disabled congregants, why don't you take some of your own advice? Because just because we have all this time on our hands doesn't mean that you need to spend time. Doesn't mean that you don't need to spend time with God. You need to spend time with God just as much as I do, probably even more, because you're so busy with your schedule. Who knows how much time you're actually spending with God as a youth leader or as a head pastor. So that really irritated me because I felt like the Nick, why don't you go spend time with God, was a way of blowing me off because I'm too busy for you. So I don't want to have time for you. And I will say that when we had to fire our pastor at First Baptist Church of Hammond in 2012, that was a hard time for me personally because I had been on the list to see him for an appointment for over a year, and I couldn't get to him because he was doing other things he shouldn't be doing. I'm not going to get into it. You can look it up. It's no point in getting into it. But, and I was thinking, why couldn't he spend time with me? But he was spending time with people that he shouldn't spend time with, or a specific person. And I guess, he wasn't really spending time with God, but he was really spending time with somebody he shouldn't. That's all that was going through my head. And I guess at that point, and both these stories that I'm going to tell you today, I now believe that God was probably protecting me from getting close to these men, because that's the only thing I can come up with. When John Wilkerson took over in 2013, that is actually the first real pastor I felt I had. He would just stop by my house and just come see me at a moment's notice. Wouldn't call, would just show up. And I love that. I know some people are like, please don't show up and you're a pastor and my house is dirty. I didn't really care. My mom probably cared a lot, but I didn't. Because at that point, I knew he really cared. I remember the first year that John Wilkerson became pastor, when I moved to Ohio. He called me on my birthday from a trip that he was on. He was on a trip halfway around the world, and he called me and he was just like, I just want to let you know, I'm just glad for the day that I met you, and I'm glad that I had a chance to pastor you, and I love you. Happy birthday. And that really meant a lot to me. And I wish there were a lot more pastors out there like John Wilkerson, because the big ministry and the lights don't matter to him. Is he perfect? No, but he is one of the best pastors. As far as a pastor, he's not a preacher, he'll tell you that, but he is one of the best pastors in this country that I believe America has, simply because he knows how to love his people. that he shepherds. But I will say, I really wanted to get involved at First Baptist when I was there under the other leadership, and it just didn't happen. I don't know if it was lack of my parents wanting to take me or lack of people wanting to make sure I could get involved. I think it was a little bit of both, and it kind of made me resent church in a way, because I'll say it again, I was good enough for a weekly sermon illustration, but I wasn't good enough to be given any type of leadership position or just help volunteer at the church. And before you say, well, why weren't you a greeter? I've driven around all my churches that I've ever been a part of and greeted everybody that I could in the buildings. And so to say to me, well, why didn't you be a greeter at the door? I've already done that, and I don't have a problem doing that. I think everybody should be a greeter at a church. It shouldn't be a specific group of people, but I don't think that should be the only thing that's available to disabled people when it comes to church. Oh, why don't you be a greeter? I think there should be a plethora of options available. Excuse me, I got a cough. I'm going to tell you a little bit of something else from another church that I was involved here in Columbus, Ohio. I went to World Harvest Church in Columbus, Ohio, pastored by Rod and his wife, Joni Parsley. I left there in June. I will keep the details very brief as to why I left. And I'll just say that it has come out that the leadership doesn't practice what they preach, and nor do they care. That's all I'll say about that. I was wanting to go to World Harvest for a long time because Pastor Rod and Miss Joni have a son on the autism spectrum. And I'm thinking, okay, this is a pastor that understands the world of disability because he has a son that is disabled. So him and his wife are really going to understand it. And boy, was I sorely disappointed. Um, you know, he started going to World Harvest Church in 2019, and then COVID happened. And so we were out of church for several months. But when we came back during COVID, I had been praying and I had been telling God, I want to get closer to Pastor Parsley. I want to get closer to him and his family. And, I want to see what I can do in their television ministry, because if you know anything about World Harvest, they have a huge television ministry. And, as you guys know, I do podcasts and I do TikTok, and I eventually want to get into real television and do that thing. So I felt that being at World Harvest, not only do I have a pastor that understands the world of disability because his son is disabled, but I have a pastor with a worldwide television ministry, and maybe I can get in and get my feet wet, so to speak. Well, that didn't happen. So in 2021, when we started coming back from COVID, I felt the Spirit of God say to me, if you want to get closer to Pastor Parsley and his family, move up. Because at the time, I was sitting in what they deemed as a wheelchair section, and I don't think any church should have a designated area for a wheelchair section. I mean, if you want to, I think that's okay, but I think all of the parts of your auditorium should be accessible to where anybody in a wheelchair can sit wherever they want, no matter where they are. Now, on the platform, that's a different thing. Obviously, I'm not going to go up there and be like, hey, I want to be on the platform, even though I'm not in leadership. Okay. So, but anybody, anywhere within your auditorium that anybody else without a disability can sit should be available to those with a disability, whether they're a wheelchair user or not. And that wasn't the case for me, especially when I was going to World Harvest. So back before we left for COVID, I was sitting in what they deemed as a wheelchair section. Well, the hard thing about that was also where their big TV cameras were. And so they were constantly asking me to move out of the way because my chair was getting wrapped up in the cords. And could I do this? And could I move here? And could I do somebody else that's in a wheelchair wants to sit here? And the wheelchair sections weren't big enough for maybe more than one wheelchair. That's another issue I have. World Harvest had 5,200 seats, and your wheelchair section was only big enough for one wheelchair, one or two wheelchairs, maybe three at the most, if you're squeezing people. And so when we came back from COVID, I decided to move down front by the Spirit of God's direction. He gave me the words that he gave me were move up. So I moved up. And there was no problem with me sitting in the third row. I found a tribe of people, as I would like to call them. And, there was a lady, her name was Gina Davis, and she was wonderful to me. She would make me meals every Sunday because she knew I lived alone and didn't have opportunity to cook a lot, and my caregivers didn't know how to cook, so she was awesome. And the issue I had, though, I could never really get to Pastor and his family. And I remember complaining to my grandma a lot about this because she knows how much I love Pastor Parsley. Notice I said that in present tense. She knows how much I love Pastor Parsley, meaning I still love him. I still love you, Pastor, if you listen to this. And she said, well, why don't you just ask him next time he comes up to you if you can have a meeting with him? Oh, let me back up a little bit. So when I started going to World Harvest, I don't know what it is. Pastor Parsley and I immediately connected. He saw me in the lobby on one Wednesday night, August 28th, 2019, and came up to me, gave me a big hug. And every Sunday since then and Wednesday, he made it a point to at least stop by my seat and see me. And I remember one particular Sunday, I was sitting back in the wheelchair section at the time. This is pre-COVID. And he came off the platform in the middle of announcements to just give me a big hug, came straight to my seat. And, probably high-fived a few other people, but came directly to me and gave me a big hug and said, I love you. I'm glad you're here. And so I thought, okay, maybe my dreams are coming true, that, he has a son with a disability. So he's going to make him know he's going to make sure that I'm seen, just like he makes sure that his son is seen. And so little did I know that that wasn't the case. But anyway, back to what I was saying was that I was talking to my grandma and I was trying to say, because at this point I had moved down front, and I was talking to my grandma and I was trying to say, I really want a meeting with Pastor Parsley just to share with him my story and tell him how I feel and what I'm trying to do and all that type of stuff. And she said, well, the next time he comes up to you, why don't you just ask him for a meeting? So I did. And I'll just tell you guys, I'm a rebel. I'm a rule breaker. I try to figure out a way to get around the rules, not necessarily break them. But if I end up breaking them, it's no big deal. So apparently, you're not supposed to go up to a big guy like Pastor Parsley or my former pastor either that ended up going to jail and just ask him for an appointment. You have to go through a litany of things to get an appointment with him. Well, Pastor Parsley, walks in one Sunday and I'm sitting right there on the third row. Again, no issue. And he says, "Hey, how you doing?" Gives me a big hug. I was like, "Hey, I'm doing great. I would love to sit down with you and have a meeting with you one day after church, just to kind of get to know you better." And he'd be like, "That's cool. We'll do it." That's what he said to me. You guys, it literally took 1 year from the time I said, "Pastor Parsley, I would like to have a meeting with you." It took 1 year to get that appointment. And the appointment was 15 minutes long. And Pastor Parsley was very gracious, very kind. Pastor Parsley, if you've ever watched him, he's very out there when he's on the platform. But when he's off the platform, at least when I saw him, he's the exact opposite. He's very quiet and very shy. And he was just so kind to me. And, and I told him, what I had been through at the other church, my former pastor telling me that my wheelchair is a prison and I have to deal with it, which I've told you guys that story many times before. I won't go into it. And he was like, "Oh my word, I never heard of such a thing. I'm so sorry that you went through that." And he was just very kind. And I should have taken that opportunity. It was a mistake on my part, but again, probably God's protection. I should have taken that opportunity to tell Pastor Parsley, "Hey, you know, I would love to get involved in television. I have a big following on TikTok." At the time, I did not have a podcast. I didn't start the podcast until last year. So I should have made a mention to Pastor Parsley, "Hey, this is what I want to do." But again, even though I look at that as a mistake on my part, I look at it now as God's protection because of what I know. Um, and Pastor Parsley did a lot of things, a lot of the same things, a lot of the exploitation. He would come hug me when the cameras were on, or, if I was really dancing and praising God, he would say, "If Nick can do it, you can do it. What's your problem?" And, and I just would feel so bad. And then what happened this summer was at the end of last year, 2024. I had been trying to get involved at this point for years. It was coming up on my 6 year anniversary at World Harvest. And I had talked to the head elder at the time, Elder Bill Canfield, who I loved still. And he said, "Let me do some checking for you. Let's try to do something." And all they could come up with was, let you be a greeter. And so that's what he came up with, when I asked him about it in December of 2024. And then they also informed me in December of 2024 that I would not be able to sit down front anymore where I had been with everybody else because it's a fire hazard. And the fire marshal came in on a Sunday morning and saw me sitting there and said, "That's illegal. You need to take care of that." Well, first of all, World Harvest Church already knew that that was illegal because they told me, "Typically you're not supposed to sit there, but Pastor wants you down here, so that's what we're going to do." And I was like, "Are you sure? Are you sure you don't want me to move somewhere else?" And they were like, "Nope, Pastor wants you down there. But every time it would come for a Dominion camp meeting, they were sure to move me out of there because we had pretty close up to maybe, I want to say about maybe 2,000 people during Dominion camp meeting. It's not as big as it used to be when I would watch on TV growing up. It was probably about 2,000 people during Dominion camp meeting, and then it got smaller as the days went on. And so they'd be like, Nick, you can't sit here during Dominion camp meeting. You've got to go in the wheelchair section, which again, people would ask me to move from there. And I'd be like, well, where am I supposed to sit? So it was just ridiculous. So go to June 1st when I decided my day was the last day. I found out again that the leadership, I'm not going to get into it. I found out again that leadership wasn't living what they preached, and I found out some hard information. And I decided that day that I had to leave World Harvest. But what was the cherry on top for me was I was down in the altar praising God, and like I had been many times before. And they had said, excuse me, we don't want you to get hurt just in case anybody runs. They never said that to me in 6 years. I was always allowed to be down in that altar. Pastor Parsley loved having me down in that altar. And he said I brought the anointing on him. Now, I know that's kind of ridiculous now, but he said I brought the anointing on him. And, but no, not that Sunday. I was told to get out of the altar and they didn't want me to get hurt. So that was the cherry on top. And I say all this to say, first of all, pastors, don't use your disabled congregants as exploitation to yell at your other members, because your disabled congregation can get there. Why can't your non-disabled? You don't know what your non-disabled congregation is going through in order to get through your door. And make a place, not make your whole entire congregation accessible to your disabled congregants, not just a certain section. And we have so much more to offer than just saying, hey, welcome to church today, which everybody should be a church greeter, whether you're disabled or not. And it shouldn't be up to the disabled congregation to be church greeters first. Let them be in your ministry. Let them be in your creative arts ministry. Let them be in your television ministry. If they can do it, if you can figure out a way for them to get around their disability and be a vibrant part of your ministry, do it. And a lot of times, disabled people go to church for connection, and they want a connection with the head pastor, because a lot of times that's their channel to God, which I will say, disabled Christians, don't make your channel to God the head pastor. You can lean on him, you can get counsel from him, but don't make that your primary channel to God. Make your own channel to God. Make yourself available to God, because your pastor, as much as he or she may not want to, they will let you down at the end of the day, because they are human. And make your own channel to God. But pastors, at the same time, make yourself extra available to your disabled congregants. And if your congregants, whether they're disabled or not, don't know where your office is, and can't get access to you because you're such a celebrity, aka Pastor Parsley, you need to change that, sure. And Pastor Parsley, I don't know if what has been said about you is actually true, but if it is, you need to get right with our Heavenly Father. And I will be honest with you and say, Pastor, I know that there are some issues that I need to get right with my Heavenly Father. So I don't want you to sit here and think that I'm just picking the beam out of your eye. I'm picking the beam out of my eye as I speak. But yeah, this is why I've left church. And I don't want to just go because I'm friends with the pastor or, I'm involved. I want to go because I'm drawn to it. I want to go because I get something out of it. I want to go because when I go, the people are blessed. They're not guilted into going because if I'm there, they can be there. I want to go because I'm a part of that family. And if I'm not there, the family misses me. So right now, I just haven't found a church that's like that. And that's why I don't go to church right now. And you can throw all the scriptures you want and you can say, don't forsake the assembling of yourselves together. Look, I'm at a point where I think at this point, church is not a building. It's wherever you and people from the church get together. And whether you have lunch with your former church members or don't, that's up to you, whether you worship in a church or worship at home. Right now, I worship at home on Sunday because I feel like I can still get the word and I don't have to be told to get out of the way or go sit in the back where there's nobody sitting, which is what World Harvest made me do near the end of my time there. And I didn't feel like I was a part of the church anymore. And so I hated how that made me feel. And so, like I said, with that and with knowing that the leadership isn't spiritually where they need to be, I left. I think I'll give it about a year before I go to church again. I've been out of church since June of 2025, and I've been out of church a year. And I've been out of church since June of 2025, so I've been out of church a few months. So I'm going to give it a year and continue to pray and seek God and what He wants me to do. But yeah, pastors, if you get anything out of this episode today, number one, quit exploiting your disabled congregants because we hate it. Number two, make your whole sanctuary accessible from the front to the back, not just a certain section. Number three, make time for the disabled congregation that you are set to oversee. And don't be such a king. Be accessible to all of your church members. I hope this episode opens the eyes of Pastor Parsley and maybe some other pastors. This wasn't a beat up session of anybody. I just wanted to share why I, as a Christian, don't go to church right now because I feel like I'm only worth exploiting. And I don't want to be in a church where all I'm worth to them is a sermon illustration. So that's why I don't go. Pastor Parsley, I love you. Pastor Wilkerson, you're the best. And I hope this really opens the eyes to a lot of pastors and how they treat not only their disabled congregants, but their congregation as a whole. I love you guys. This is the Nick Speaks podcast, the podcast where the disabled community is magnified and we speak up speak out and speak loud about the issues that matter to the disabled the most. I am your ever so sexy host, Nick Comstock. Thank you for joining me today, and be sure to use the promo code Speak Up at Columbus Restorative Massage and Wellness Studio to get your 20% off your massage. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next week. Bye.